Bomb, 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 blum, 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 blum,
You
blum.
got me ready to go work on some music, man.
Hey, man, we need that. I think we need to have that, man. I think people forget who we are. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you got me ready.
Forget,
I'm
you know
ready.
what I'm saying? Yeah. Blum, blum. You know, I used to always love that Sister Nancy sample. Remember main source of that blum, blum, dun, dun, dee, dun, blum, blum.
That joint was hard.
That joint is real hard.
As soon as it came on, you know, if you was... Anyway, yeah. That
bang, bang. Dun, 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 dun. What y'all know? We in it. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we back to the grill again.
Yes.
The grill again. Back to the grill again. The grill again. Man, we got a show. Listen. We missed y'all. We apologized last week. I did my grandmother's funeral, and so I was a little emotional. And so I talked to Strike, and he was like, bro, we don't got to do this joint, man. So I was like, good, I appreciate that. I think I did a brief video and share that with y'all last week. But we here, man. We got a crazy topic that we want to talk about today. But first,
yes, sir.
Let's make sure we recognize it's season 5, episode 12. Cross-examine, you know what I'm saying? Strizzy Strike, the Wolverine, Kurt, the Beast Kennedy. You know what I'm saying? This Beast the Wolverine. Right here, this is how we get down, man. We got a crazy joint for y'all today. We're gonna be talking about whatever. The Bible note taker, what's good, baby? What up? You know what I'm saying?
What's going on?
Introduce yourself in the comment section. Don't forget, man, I figured this out. The reason why you tell people to hit the like and subscribe button early is for the algorithm, man. The algorithm.
That's the way
listen,
it's set up.
Yes, hit the like and subscribe button. Do that so that the algorithm says, man, these guys, they got something to talk about. We want to get them out there. But we ain't going to take up too much time, man. We're going to get it. Oh, real quick. For those of you waiting for The Color of Satan, Part 2, tomorrow. I'll be dropping that tomorrow around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A lot of people have been hitting me like, bro, I want to hit a Part 2. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It was good, man. It was good.
Yeah.
It was a good video.
Yeah, we're going to do Part 2 tomorrow, The Color of Satan. We're going to get it. I'm going to make the point, double down, and all that stuff. All right. Man, listen, y'all. We got an episode for y'all today. We're going to talk about something that, yeah. That's what's up. I see you. Yo, first time catching y'all live. That's a DPT. That's what's good. The homie Brandon. Hey, Brandon's the homie. You know, what's up, Brandon? Brandon's the homie, bro. He share your stuff like, yo, Kennedy killing it all the time, bro. That's family right there. One of these episodes, we're gonna get Brandon on here, we're gonna get Future on here, we're gonna get Kira on here, all the people that bang with us and do that, man. We got Kim checking in for the first time. That's what I'm talking about, Kim. Glad you're here. Good to see you. I like your thumb. Look like you got some beautiful daughters right there. That's what I'm talking about. I love seeing the family. That's good, man. All right, we're gonna jump in just a minute. We got a crazy show, a topic for y'all. So I'm asking you to stay tuned. But first, I gotta talk to my homie about. Talk to me, man. I know. Talk to me about real quick, man. The NFL playoffs. How you feeling? Who y'all got? Who is Philly? I got to, man. Redskins.
We got the Giants, man.
That's right. Man. Y'all can take that though.
Yeah, we got the Giants. I mean,
were you surprised they beat the Vikings though? I was surprised they beat the Vikings. Yeah, I was.
Yeah, but you know what? The Vikings been kind of faking though towards the end of the season. That they was a little bit faking.
Yeah, they have been. I feel bad for them because they always have a good regular season and then mess it up at the playoffs.
Yes,
like Kirk Cousins used to QB for us. So when is y'all game? Is y'all Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday night, 8:00.
Yes, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be watching. You know, I'm not gonna be there, but I'm gonna be watching. You know what I'm saying?
It'll be interesting, man. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited. It should be fun to watch. See what happens. I mean, you know, I'm honestly looking more forward. I mean, if we get past the Giants, which I think we will, I'm looking forward to playing the 49ers. You know what I'm saying? But even if we play Dallas, whatever, it's still either way. It's
good game. It's some good
NFC
teams left.
Game.
It's some good games left. Woo.
It's a big game either way. Yeah.
Facebook user, we don't know who you are because Facebook it won't let us know. But I'm sure it's somebody that we know watching us on the Facebook live stream on the cross-examine joint. Welcome, you know what I'm saying? Brandon, well said. Division games are always tough. We're going to get Brandon on here. We're going to talk sports, man. We need to do a sports show all that time. All right. Mm-hmm. All right, don't forget, y'all. Some of y'all would not be aware of this because you're so used to relating to me through like insights and videos and we do cross-examine. But we also artists, man, musicians, and we got some fire. I'm talking about we got flames coming up soon. It's some music. I was just playing some music, getting him hyped. We got Fuego. We got some stuff coming up soon. So
an
stand on the
album
lookout
that
for
you
that.
cannot listen to. You must not listen to this album.
Yeah, you cannot listen to this
Must not.
one. You cannot listen to this one. This one's coming out soon. So stay with us, man. Don't forget, support us because we support y'all. We work hard to give y'all the thoughts to help you think through culture in a way that honors the Lord. At least we try to.
Word up.
That's what we try
Word
to
up.
do.
That's what we try to
All
do.
right. Let me introduce to you what we're going to talk about today, cross-examiners. Here's the topic. A couple of months ago, me and Strack had a conversation, and just a quick background. I come from a family of churches called Sovereign Grace Ministries. And in this church, there was a guy named, in the family of churches, there was a guy named Joshua Harris who wrote a book called I Kiss Dating Goodbye, that when I got to the church, the book was on fire. Like it had blown up. Like it was huge. Well, Josh Harris I was on staff at Covenant Life with Josh. It was a mega church in Gaithersburg, Maryland. He was my friend. I've been to his house. I was in his documentary, I Survived, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. So this book blew up, and it became, in many ways, the blueprint for Christian dating to a lot of people. It was one of those things you had a love-hate relationship with the book. Either you loved it and you wanted to apply it, or you hated what it said. But what I didn't realize, because I was coming from the street, I was essentially a drug dealer, street dude, got locked up a little bit, went through some legal trouble, came out of that, and then started to go to this church randomly. My buddy was going in, so you should come here. It was a totally different experience for me. But I started going to this church. I didn't realize that this book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, and even the way that our church was practicing sort of the process of marriage was coming out of what was started in the early 90s called purity culture. So this book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, I think was sort of, I mean, you would probably agree with this. I think it was the last sort of vestige of that movement. It was almost like
the last hurrah.
Yeah, it was the last hurrah. I'm not saying that there are people who still practice those things and all of that.
The last of the mainstream, drops, if you would. That was it.
Yeah. Right. No, it was. And so I didn't know that because I was not a believer during this time. But as I started to find this out, and when Josh eventually, he reneged on his faith, he rejected Christianity. He rejected the book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, did a documentary, and he asked me to be in it. And the documentary went all over the world. And your boy was in that joint with the low Caesar, looking fat but dapper.
The church was in that joint too, right? Because he did that
Solid Rock. He did that at my church. Yeah. They did that. So all that happens, and then I find out much later that this is about part of a bigger sort of rejection of what's called purity culture. Mm-hmm. All right. So let me tell you what today's episode is essentially about, and then we're going to walk you through what we mean by purity culture. Here's the point that we're going to make today. This is the main point. Evangelical purity culture paved the way for the acceptance of gay marriage in the church.
I wish I had that rules line.
Right. That's the point we're gonna make today. And I'm sure this is gonna sound like, what in the world are you talking about? But if you follow what we do, you know that we bring out things and then we make connections and help you see it. So this is not far-fetched. But this is the point that I want to make today. We're not just talking about purity culture, but specifically, I believe, and we're going to point out as we go through this, that evangelical Christianity, it was conservative Christianity, purity culture paved the way for the acceptance of gay marriage in the church. Not in the world, but in the church. That's the point we're going to prove today. So to do that, let's start with this question, especially for those of you who don't know. What is purity culture? Or better said, what was? I think, in fact, you tell me because you were in this. So I want to hear first a little bit of your story about this and all that. But what is purity culture, or what was it, Strack?
Well, I think purity culture was people's attempt, and I say people's, I don't mean just the church, though we're referring to mostly the church, but people's attempt at trying to maintain the purity of youth. This is in the midst of like AIDS stuff. Like there's all kind of stuff was going on at the
Teenage
time.
pregnancy rate was going crazy.
Was going through the roof. Abortion was still a hot discussion. I mean, teen pregnancies, sex, like AIDS, all of that, STDs as a whole, all of that stuff was on like, that was even the time where it was like a big deal, sex education in schools. Like, how much do we talk about? Do we give condoms?
Right.
All of that stuff was huge. So this was kind of like a reactionary attempt at, we'll show y'all how this is done. Abstinence is the way. This is what the Bible says. And then the only way to get to the goal is through marriage. So that's that purity culture in a nutshell. Was stay abstinent up until marriage because you'll be safe from all of the effects of having sex outside of marriage.
Right. Okay. Good. So it was to reiterate, and it was an ideology that was largely crafted by parents and Christian leaders in the evangelical, largely conservative church, where the emphasis, we're going to talk about some of the methodology in just a moment, but it was an ideology that was really in many ways reacting to the high teen pregnancy rate. Around the time when purity culture started in the early 90s, this is when HIV and AIDS was really becoming a major thing. Many of you may not remember this, but in 1991, Irvin Magic Johnson, had gotten HIV. And to the point where it was such a crazy thing, I'll never forget that in the NBA All-Star game that year, players didn't want him to play because it was such a sort of, no one knew how you really get the disease and all of that. And so they created this rule in the NBA that if you were bleeding, if you had blood, you got to get out of the game. And you could not come back at all if there was any blood showing. This lasted for a couple of years. Obviously, the Lord was merciful to that man. He's still alive. Doesn't look like he had nothing happen. His wife, Cookie, they still alive. Nothing happened. But it was a big deal. HIV was a big deal. High teen pregnancy was a big deal. You had a lot of stuff, a lot of teenage drinking. Remember Mothers Against Drunk Driving? MADD, M-A-D-D, that was a big deal. There was a lot of emphasis. It was a lot of emphasis on teenagers and worrying about them. A lot of youth group emphasis switched into sexuality because a lot of kids, particularly in these conservative, mostly white evangelical churches, a lot of them weren't doing drugs. They had been homeschooled, grew up in a certain atmosphere. The one area that you could really target them, teens, was sex, because that's the one thing that everyone's growing in a desire for relationships and sex.
Well, that's the one thing that you could peek into that world privately. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
you had to go to somebody else to get drugs. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to go to nobody else to look at some funky stuff online.
And even like porn, back then there was no computers, man. There wasn't no internet, right? So you had to go to a store and buy a magazine.
Well, but the thing is, Pops had stuff.
You know what I'm saying? Or videotapes.
I'm not talking about my Pops per se, but we're going to leave that on the side burner.
Right. Right. No, listen, Dad had some videotapes.
Parents had stuff, you know what I mean? And friends had stuff. I mean, the stuff was accessible from a very young age. The first time I was exposed to pornography was just going over to a friend's house that had like cable. When I say cable, I mean like paid channels. You know what I'm saying? Like the then the paid channels.
Right, that's right.
You had them paid channels. You could watch some stuff. You know what I'm saying? And the friend exposed, and he was actually a younger kid, showed me the porn, and that was it.
Yeah, I was in elementary. I mean, Debbie Does Dallas or something was one of the first shows I got exposed. I was like, what in the world? So yeah, you're right. No, that's true. It was accessible. I mean, it's obviously more accessible now. But back then it was that. All right, so purity culture is I think initially it was a well-intentioned desire for Christians to preserve the commands of, fornication and not to commit sex outside of marriage and all of that. It was well intentioned initially.
The idea is a biblical idea. Yeah.
The problem is, as we're going to point out, and we'll put evangelical purity culture, it paved the way for the acceptance of gay marriage in the church. So let's talk about purity methodology. Now, I have talked to people. I've watched a good bit of YouTube videos from people, and they're just, and then Strike, you have your own story. There are a lot of similarities. So the stuff that we're going to bring up, some of you who may have lived through that will be like, yep, I can relate, or you might have your own perspective. Please feel free to give your perspective in the comment section. Yeah, you did. As a matter of fact, look, Brandon put it out. He said, yep, you talked about this.
Well, that was a different situation.
That was different. That was a specific situation.
Yeah, that was a very different situation.
Yeah,
that was,
but on one level. But
this
Brandon's
was just my exposure.
Hip.
This was my exposure to pornography on screen.
Yeah, but what I appreciate is Brandon's always hip though. He'd be like,
yeah, he's on point. Yeah,
he's on point with him.
Yeah.
All right, here's some of the distinctives, some of the methodology of purity culture. All right, so one of the first things was, and this was consistent that everyone said, there was an emphasis on female virginity.
Right.
An emphasis on female virginity. And there was good things and bad things about this. So the good things were, hey, you know, sex before marriage, outside of marriage, doesn't honor the Lord. Mm-hmm. And here's the problem. Well, the good, so it didn't honor the Lord. It was a way to do this. And the way it was framed was you're trying to do this until marriage, and marriage is a gift from the Lord and so forth. And that it's a good thing to be like, hey, you want to preserve your kids, your children's virginity because it honors the Lord. But here's part of the problem with the emphasis on female virginity. It was more on females than males. There was a lot of people who would give these illustrations in sermons at conferences that were taught. And it would be like this. Someone hold up a glass of water and throw dirt in it, and then would say something like, if you have sex and you're like this dirty water, do you want to give your husband this dirty water? Or they would take a chocolate bar. So many people did this that I know that these actually happened. These were all, they would break it into pieces. Every time you have sex with someone, you're breaking off a piece of yourself. Do you want to give your husband this one small piece? Right? That was one of the things that they said. So there was a lot of methodology where the emphasis was on female virginity, more so than males. It was really about like girls protecting their virginity, and under this idea. One of the problems with the purity culture movement was it really didn't use biblical language and give people biblical vision. So they would use words like abstinence. That's a word that the world uses. Right? It was abstinence. The Bible doesn't talk about abstinence in the way it does, the idea, but the actual language is something that's not in the Bible. So these kids who are hearing this are really being indoctrinated by an ideology that's somewhat connected to worldly language, and it becomes less about a conviction to honor the Lord and more about not being like the surrounding culture. And that was one of the main problems. And so it's like, and make no mistake, brothers and sisters, your motivation for your obedience is as important as your obedience. For sure. I mean, if you think about it, like, I mean, think about this for a second. Like, if almost every major world religion has some form of morality, right? Mm-hmm. Some form of it, right? So Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Baha'i faith, I mean, everything has some form of works, right? So what makes your works, if you're a believer, if you're of the Christian tradition like we are, what makes your works different than a Muslim, right? Well, they pray 5 times a day. They resist the same sexual sins. They have good relationships with their families. They don't cheat on that. All the things they can list, but their motive of obedience is to the wrong person. Mm-hmm. It's to the wrong person. So their works can't really hold the weight. So the motive of your obedience is huge. And in the purity culture, it was really about don't be like the world, but you're using the world's language, right? It's like, we need to be, you're comparing yourself to the world, and there wasn't a compelling, which we'll get into in a moment, there wasn't a compelling vision for how to do this because of the conviction of the Lord. Strap, what was your experience like?
My experience with Specifically, what? I mean, purity culture as a whole.
Yeah. Just like as we're going through some of these, like, did you see these or hear these taught?
Oh, I definitely saw them. I saw all of them. I start thinking about what you're saying and mentally processing. But yeah, I saw all of these things, man. Especially when you're talking about the women. I think because women are seen as objects, that we're supposed to protect in Scripture. They're supposed to be shielded, guarded. Like more like the treasure, like he who finds a good a good wife finds a good thing.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. Like so I think all of that kind of lended towards maybe the overemphasis on women's purity versus men's purity. Plus, you got the old good old boys club mentality as well, which does exist. I mean, boys will be boys. The main thing is that women are preserved because they show evidence of being tainted or however of not having their virginity. You know what I'm saying? They show evidence of that in the marriage bed. There's evidence. So I think all of that kind of plays into why there was an overemphasis, unjust, of course, and definitely I saw it because there was an ignorance or a lack of awareness or maybe an ignoring of the struggles that young men were having. I mean, it wasn't until I was an adult in church that I was asked, have I looked at porn this week? Or have I lusted in my heart? Like, where's my heart before the Lord in regards to sexuality? Like, these are questions that teenagers should be getting asked at home primarily by their mothers and fathers, first and foremost. But also,
which is another problem. I'm glad you said that. Let me just say this real quick and then go back. That was another problem. It was largely put on religious, like teachers, like pastors, and things like that, and not parents.
Yeah.
And parents are going to have different pastors and stuff. They teach. Parents interact with their children on a different level. Right. And so, let me go ahead.
When you talk about, like, just to give a little bit of background, when you talk about church cultures, I mean, especially within the urban setting, a lot of these people are looking to make their lives better. They just want to get out the hood, or they want to stop being broke. They're seeking some way out, at least in the setting that I was involved in, or a lot of the churches I was involved in. So when that is the case, that they're just seeking for some way better, man, I lost my train of thought now.
No, I get it though. I probably messed you up.
Yo, that's terrible.
Yeah, I hate that.
But when they're seeking for something better, you're talking about
you need to take some Gin Cobra, bro. You need some
what's
Gin
that?
Cobra. I don't know. One of the vitamins, man.
I need to take some Chill Kurt. I need to take some Chill Kurt. But we was just talking about the overemphasis. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, either way, man, the fact is, men were ignored. Young men were ignored. These parents, now I'm getting it back. These parents are upstairs trying to learn about the Lord. They're trying to learn about how to make their lives better in their minds. That's their goal, right? If they're not taught a proper gospel. So their kids, they just sending them downstairs, like, just go deal with you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I'll get to y'all when we get home for an hour or two before I send you to bed. You know what I'm saying? Because you were in school all day long, and then you go to church, go to youth group, and then go home and go to sleep. You know what I'm saying? Like, or an hour or two. So there's not much interactions already to begin with. So the church is kind of becomes the default center where they're supposed to learn everything about life to be ready for adulthood, to be ready to graduate high school.
Yeah. Well said, bro.
That's just mad irresponsible as parents.
It was the growth of, like, youth groups in many ways, right? Like,
and a lot of these dudes who were like youth leaders or whatever went through the same system,
right?
And they just proved to be a little bit more mature than others. So they were like, hey, oh, you guys don't have plans? You could be a youth leader. That way you could still hang around the youth and still kind of, because you don't fit in yet with the adults. So let's make you a youth leader. Meanwhile, this young dude or young lady, has interest in some of those that are there.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, I'm about to say, that's another can of worms. All right, let's go to this real quick. Langston McKee asks this question. Kevin DeYoung in Whole of Our Holiness lays out an argument for pursuing holiness without concern to motivation until you grow in sanctification. At least that's what I took away. And he's asking, is that off from your perspective? So I remember Kevin's book. He was a personal friend for a while, but we haven't talked in years. But I remember reading that book reading some of it. So here's what I would say to answer your question. I think biblical maturity. This is what I could back this up with scripture, but this isn't the point of the convo today. But I personally believe from the Bible that biblical maturity is when you are doing things because you're motivated with a conviction to honor the Lord. Like your primary motivation is because you want to please God. So you have Jesus saying, "I always do what pleases the Father. My food is to do the will of the Father," right? So there's an idea that we're to be imitators of God, that we're trying to do. Paul did what he did. Paul boasted in his weakness. Paul, 2 Corinthians 11, all the suffering he went through was because he wanted to glorify God. Right. So I think, and then lastly, I'll say this, in Hebrews 5, 12 through 14, the writer of Hebrews gives a really a stern correction to them where he says, look, some of you should be teachers of the law by now, but you need someone to teach you the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. Solid food is for the mature. So I think that while Kevin maybe, I don't know his argument and if that's what he was saying, but I would say that the goal of biblical maturity is that my obedience is motivated primarily, if not solely, because I'm trying to honor the Lord. So that's the way I love my family, all of it. Doesn't mean I don't have emotional attachment to them, but I do things because I want to honor the Lord, and I think it serves my church or this person to do that more than I have this affection for them, and that's why I do it.
Right. I mean, we're told to do all things as unto the Lord. 100%. But I mean, even if you bring it down to the context of what we're talking about right now within marriage,
yeah.
I used to ask myself when I was single prior to marrying Flora. I came to the conclusion that the Lord brought this awareness to me. Do I long for the wedding feast here on earth more than the wedding feast in heaven? I think there was a question of what do I long for more to put into perspective this proper desire that I had, because I had a good desire for a wife, but the reality is, what if I didn't get one? Did the marriage feast in heaven still satisfy me enough to be able to withhold me, to satisfy me until I'm with him for eternity?
Amen.
That was the question I had to ask myself before truly being prepared for marriage, I think.
Yeah, well said, bro. Now that's real. And I think, and so I'm going to say one more thing about the emphasis on female virginity. What it did was, and Strack alluded to this, but I want to double down on this because this is what a lot of people that I talked to and then I saw in the videos brought this up. What it did was, because it minimized men's sexuality and their responsibility, there was an emphasis on like modesty and not tempting your brother to stumble, almost acting as if men are incapable of being self-controlled. And so you heard stuff like this promoted rape culture, and like almost like guys like, oh, she was wearing tights or a skirt and I couldn't help myself. Or even pastors. I mean, we've heard recently of pastors who have been exposed in certain denominations that were sinning in sexual ways and almost blaming it on the victim. So the purity culture's emphasis on female virginity, while maybe not meaning to do this, the consequential reality was that it minimized male responsibility. It minimized that men need to be like, listen, let's just be clear. We just came out of a pandemic. Or if you live in the Middle East, women are all dressed up. You don't see nothing but eyes. You can still lust off with some pretty eyes, man. Like you can lust off of a girl whose nails are done and groomed, and you can be attracted. So the emphasis though was on women being modest and women doing this, and it really made them almost feel awkward about just growing and being a sexual being.
I think the problem is that the requirement went across the board. It didn't matter how the level of the maturity of the woman.
100%.
It didn't matter. So you're telling 10-year-olds the same thing as you're telling 30, 40-year-olds.
Right.
You're also telling a prostitute who just got saved the same thing you're telling somebody who's in the faith for 40 years.
100%.
Like there was no, direct addressing. It was just
Blanket
across the
statement.
board.
Yep. Blanket.
Women can't wear this because they'll do this, and men are
Right.
this. Like, what you mean? So
Yeah.
when a man walks outside, then what's his excuse?
Right. Yeah.
Or I mean, if he deals with stealing from people and somebody busts out $100 to put it in the offering basket, are you gonna blame the dude that busted out the $100 to put it in the offering basket?
Right. It was crazy stuff, right? It was crazy.
Yeah.
Well intentioned. It probably meant well, but it was well intentioned. So another layer of it being exclusively about female virginity were these purity balls, right? So these would be almost like these father-daughter dances where the daughter would dress up and the father might even give her a purity ring and would explain to her that like there was almost like a fascination with virginity.
I think they get a bad rap though. I think those father-daughter dances are dope. I mean,
I'm just saying, but this was an offshoot of it, and this is what people's experience of it. I've intentionally said I think many of this was well intentioned. Well intentioned. I don't think people have been malicious, but we got to always tweak. Like, what are we doing, and how are we doing it? And I think they were missing a lot of marks and looking at the culture from. Hold on one second. Yeah, they were missing a lot of what was happening in the culture that with the guys. It was missing it because there was this emphasis. So I don't have daughters, but I appreciate the idea, but it was a pressure that a lot of the girls looking back said they felt like they had because there wasn't the same kind of restrictions or emphasis on guys. So these purity balls weren't mothers.
They were singled out. They were singled out.
And so so to your point, you got girls as young as 10 dressed up. I mean, on one level, that's cool. That's dope. But then there's this emphasis on the daughters. Like, don't do this, don't do that. And not the guys. And so it's almost like, hey, the guys are almost not restrained. There's not an emphasis on them. They may get a message like, stop watching porn. But all the emphasis was on girls.
I guess the reason I buck back a little bit on that one is because, I mean, anytime you're building upon father-daughter relationship to show the daughter what a husband should look like, I'm all about it. You know
I agree. But when you look at it like prime example. So another thing, right? I did this a little bit, but the illustrations to dissuade from sex, all the people I've talked to in videos I saw, not one of them gave one illustration against guys. It was always about the lack of so a woman's value was connected to her virginity.
No doubt.
Essentially that. So like what you said, like it was a blanket statement. You could have a prostitute who just got saved, who has to battle some of the temptations because she's sown to that.
Or even sell clothes because I don't have enough clothes that is proper for church.
100%. So it wasn't just the father-daughter purity balls. It was the illustrations about purity were largely about shaming women. Like you look past this, everyone's spitting a cup. This is what happens when you have, and there was a lot of strong language that people heard from their teachers. Like if you're, what they call it, wasted, not wasted. Like I forgot the term that was used. It was kind of like you're wasted, trash, or you're whatever if you have sex. I get it. You're trying to instill in them, but it wasn't a value of holiness. It was almost like, you know what it was like? While I get it was well-intentioned, I think it was almost like a sexual cancel culture theology, right? Where like, if you have sex before marriage, you're wasted. You're done, kind of. And it's like, nah, fam, there's grace for that. Damaged goods. Thank you, Langston. Thank you.
How much of that do you think just comes down from history? I mean, from humanity as a whole. I mean, because if you go back to even biblical times, you deal with, where if a woman is, not a virgin at marriage and it gets found out, like all kinds of stuff can pop off. You know what I'm saying? Like, so how much of that do you think has just been passed down through history? Because let's take a 2-minute deep theology break to answer that question. So here's what I think. I think there has been a double standard against women across the boardwalk. A guy like an Andrew Tate, right? Let's talk about this guy that can boast about having sex with all these girls, but if a girl has sex with a couple guys, she's a whore, right?
Or if a girl could be 3 years older than a dude, but she's a cougar, right? But a guy can marry girls 30, 20 years younger than them. You know what I'm saying? But that can happen, and it's a double standard. Let me tell you why, what Strack is saying, why I think it happens. So in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve bit the fruit, right? And then God comes and asks, like, why did you do this? What happened? And Adam blames God, the woman you gave me, and then he blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent, and God blames everyone, right? Remember what God said to the serpent, to Satan, in Genesis 3:15. Here's what God said. He said, I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and tell you, however you've been taught that, believe whatever your pastor says, but I want to make an observation about that statement. Because God said two things. I want to put hatred as enmity between you, Satan, and the woman. Why didn't he say between you and Adam? Adam is the head. He said, I'm going to put enmity, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman, between your offspring, the people who follow you, and her offspring, so singular, Jesus, right? But he says, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman. Here's what I honestly think. When you look at the creation of Eve, we assume that there are female animals because they were two of every kind. But if we're being biblically, chronologically accurate, a female, Eve was the first woman in creation that we know of that was made in the image of God. You think about it, the Father, Son, and the Spirit are all considered masculine. Father, Son, Holy Spirit is called he. All the angels are called sons of God. Satan is called a he. So when God decides to make someone that's a suitable helper for Adam, and he makes Eve a woman, this is the first female in all of creation. This is why Adam freaked out. This is why the angels in Genesis 6 came down and had sex with these women. This was a crazy creation. That's why we still
freak out, fam.
That's why we still do, right? Right? Still do, right? But he said, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman. I think because it was the woman, the uniqueness of the creation of the woman, whom the seed would come. This is why he went at the woman, I think, Satan, because she was the uniqueness of all the creation. Technically, based on just who God is and all the angels were male, he should have made it Steve, but instead he made an Eve that was different. So now Satan hates women.
Somebody's going to take that and he should have made it Steve.
Yeah, right. I'm just based on the logic of it. They can take it however they want. I know my theology's solid, right? So look, what I'm saying is based on the logic, the Father, Son, and their perfect unity, all the sons of God, they're all meant. He made it Eve, though. That was like, whoa, what is this? Mm-hmm. So, but the point that I'm making is that God said, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman. Now, the women are the way that children come into the world, right? So this is why Satan, one of the reasons why he hates women and wants to reverse the role, because God ordained that to happen based on what happened in Genesis 3, right? God said, I'm not going to put enmity between you and Adam, but you and the woman. Between you and Eve, which is an odd statement when you think about the reality of who Adam was, male headship, all that stuff, right? Fast forward to today, we've seen nothing but throughout human history, women getting double standards, mistreated, and now today, you even have the uncreation of women based on some people's psychological, sexual proclivities. So there's just been this attack against women and a hatred for women that goes back to Genesis 3. Now, there's more I could have said, but that's not the purpose of this show.
No, that's good. I
just wanted to kind of get there with it. But again, back to where we're at, part of the illustrations to dissuade from sex were all geared towards women. So there was an emphasis there. True Love Waits was not just towards women, but it was this idea that true love waits till marriage, right? Which is a good thing. Now, I agree with this in theory. I don't know all the ways that they practiced it, but I agree with this in theory. In that, like, matter of fact, I remember meeting with someone a while ago, and I was talking to them, and I said, "Listen, if people that you're trying to date, this person was a Christian. I said, if the people that you're trying to date really actually love you, right? If they really love you, then they wouldn't try to have sex with you knowing that that will damage your relationship with the Lord."
Right.
So in the idea of true love waits, I agree that like if you really love someone and you're a Christian, if you're trying to think biblically, why would you do anything or want them to do anything that could damage their relationship with the Lord, damage their confidence in the Lord, right? Mm-hmm. But true love waits, it promised something that really wasn't necessarily accurate for everyone.
No, especially not for boys. When you give them a carrot to dangle in front of them. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, true love waits. Oh, word. All right. 100%. Where's my wife at? Where's my wife at? Where's my wife at? Where's my wife at? I gotta get these buns. Right, you know what I'm saying?
Right. So so that gets to where we're at. So now let's start with that because you hit it on the head strap. So here's the question: so then, what went wrong? Now we talked about some of it, but there are some very specific things that went wrong with purity culture. Strack alluded to the first one, so we're going to talk about that now and its implications. The idolization of marriage. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is one of the problems that went wrong. The idolization of marriage. By idolization, I mean two things. And Strack, you jump in here whenever you feel. Tell me I'm wrong. The first way that there was an idol of marriage was in the evangelical church. I'm talking about just in the church. Yes, the world wants to be married to, but I'm talking about in the church. Here's how it played out. It was the inevitability of marriage, right? So the idolization became an inevitability of marriage. So like, you're going to get married, and so you just got to wait until marriage. It didn't take into account that some people may have desires and not get married, which is a separate issue we'll talk about in just a moment. But there was this inevitability of marriage, all right? And that was cool, but God doesn't promise that. So in a deeper theological sense, what it did was it made promises about something that God does that's biblical, but God doesn't say everyone's going to experience that. In fact, 1 Corinthians 7 and Matthew 19 are clear that, like, Paul says, like, I wish all of you were not married. I wish everybody was not married like myself in the Lord, because then you'd be devoted solely to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So it gave an inevitability of marriage and an expectation of marriage that, and within that, sex within marriage, that was very dangerous, and it caused a lot of problems. When I hear, like, it was shocking to me how many people that I watched their videos and they went through this and they got divorced. Some of them have now walked away from the faith completely. Some of them have healed from that or whatever they've had to go through, but it really impacted them in negative ways. And I think a lot of guys didn't understand what marriage was and the sacrifice that it is, what it really means, because it was just something that was inevitable if you just wait. True love waits. And so,
yeah,
go ahead.
Let me just touch on it a little bit. So just from one example would be, a young man in a youth group with a young lady, they're feeling each other. They're told, they have to wait till marriage. They got to go through this process.
That's make sure they know that's slang, because they might hear feeling each other and they might think you're talking about fondling each other after church
I
in the closet.
I apologize. So they gazing at each other and they got the googly eyes.
Yeah, they like each other
for one another. They like each other. They make it known. They're going through the process of courtship and all of that. And the young lady's hearing these sermons about the roads being trampled on, all of these things. And the young man is, being told, stay away from pornography, don't masturbate. All of these, the rules are being laid out very clearly. But from their perspective, all they're seeing is, I have a desire for this person. They have a desire for me. And this is how we're told we're supposed to do it. So that's the goal. Let's get there so that this can be the best situation ever. Mm-hmm. And all the while, they have two very different expectations. Yeah. The young lady is waiting for her Prince Charming to come in and teach her all the ways of God, how good God is, how amazing he is, and he's going to protect her and all these things. And the young man is simply waiting to, do his thing.
He's trying to have sex.
What I'm saying? Yeah, to have sex. He's ready to get it popping. So when they come together, we talked about it earlier today. The young man is expecting a pure prostitute.
Yeah, basically.
You know what I'm saying?
The phrase that I said is, everybody wants a virgin that's a whore.
Yeah, I mean that's the reality.
Well,
That's
yeah.
what we find ourselves as young men
Right.
in this situation where now our view of sexuality, our view of marriage, is like, whoa, I have nothing to grab onto here because now my experience is like nothing in comparison to what I've thought it should be.
100%.
Not even close. I have no idea what the Bible says about this because nobody taught me and it's not really that detailed. And no one ever taught me from experience or told me from experience because they were too scared to because it was taboo. All I was told was stay away because it'll only be
Yeah.
good until you get married.
Right.
You
That's
know
a
what
real,
I'm saying?
that's a strong point. And this is what I mean about even the term abstinence and the way that they were talking was almost the way the world thinks, because the world elevates romance as the highest form of love, and sex and
Right. Right.
orgasms and all these things as the end all be all. And so you take sort of the idea of that the world kind of views it as, and you promote as we're waiting to be able to experience what they're talking about.
Right.
Right. And so to go to the second issue, which you alluded to, Strack, it created promises of sexual blessing that were unrealistic.
Facts.
Like, let's just be clear. Like, it's not like they the way it was presented is if you just wait. Don't get me wrong. There are other reasons to wait, right? But the way it was presented is if you wait to have sex, when you do, it's going to be, God's going to bless it in such a way that it'll be better than the world. And the reality was it just wasn't true, because what you had, and Strack alluded to this, which is another point, is that when you have men who don't have a lot of the restraints placed on them, and most of it is just like, don't watch porn. You didn't really focus on that as much as you thought you did. You got guys coming into marriage thinking their only experience of sex is in sinful lust and porn. So they want their wife, who's waited to be with her husband, to bet. This movie about a virgin who's a whore. They want a woman who's never done anything but wants to and knows how to do everything. And they're created these expectations that were so unrealistic among these Christians. And what happened was, you had young Christians getting married young. I remember meeting people like 20 and 19, and they were married. And because the reason why they did that was because many of them, that was the only way to express their sexuality was in marriage. And that's the right way, biblically speaking, don't get me wrong. But the reason why these people did it is like there was a promise of blessings that were unrealistic.
Right.
Like there's a lot to sex. Like if you're married, there's a lot to sex that to even make it good sex, that takes work. And it takes time and exploration with your spouse and things like that. And these people were just told, just wait.
Yeah,
Once you get married.
You would think the only exercise of self-denial had to do with sexuality.
100%.
You know, as a young man. I mean, that's self-denial. The epitome of it was denying oneself of their lustful desires. That was the main goal. So if that's what's taught, I mean, when you get married, you no longer have to deny yourself because you have your woman, right? But you got to deny yourself of other women. You know what I'm saying? You still got to deny yourself of a whole lot of stuff. But in your mind, you've thought, oh, I just got to deny myself of my lustful desires. And once I'm married, I'm good. The whole practice of self-denial has gone out the window, because now what you've self-denied for is not even as good as what you expected.
Right.
So what good was self-denial for in the first place?
Right. And I think, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, because if self-denial is taught as a Christian foundation, you know, this is what you do. You deny yourself and pick up your cross and you follow him. If that's brought into your marriage, then you're teaching the people to deny oneself for the sake of the other. But that's not done.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this because this is an important point you're making for a different reason as well. This is an important point. We're going to come back to this, the denying self. But you had promises of sexual blessing that were unrealistic. And Strack again alluded to this, but there was a lack of understanding of porn culture among Christians.
For sure. There still is.
There still is. I don't, and so I know this for a fact. I remember a buddy of mine a while ago got married, and when him and his wife, we were talking with them after they got married, she was saying that on the wedding night, they were both virgins, and he had watched pornography and stuff like that when he was single. And so he just went straight at it. And it was like, whoa, hold on, this was painful. This wasn't, but that was what he knew.
Right.
That was what he watched and what he knew. And so what happens is when you create this idolization,
not just what he knew, but how he got his gratification.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what he was trying to get.
Yeah. When you create this idolization of marriage and you make these promises that are unrealistic, a lot of the people that you're talking to only had either their imaginations or sinful demonstrations of that gratification. And so what you had was the reality of porn culture on these young men. It wasn't really deny self. It was deny self until marriage, as Jack alluded to, which we're going to come back to because it's a really important point. But you didn't really walk through like the challenges and the difficulties because you promised that like true love, your sex is going to be amazing and all of it, right? And sure, the pleasure of it is, but all the challenges that come with it, you had guys realizing, wow, this is actually a lot of work. And so they're still drawn to pornography because pornography is you get aroused and then you masturbate. It's easy sexual expression. Well, in your marriage, your wife, you got to get her ready. All these things happen and people rushed into marriage under these pretenses that weren't really true, and a lot of them got disillusioned and were really hurt by this. Now, I'm not saying it was wrong for them to wait till no, not at all. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about the way things were explained to people, set in motion, some things that we're going to hit in just a minute that I don't think that they understood and really appreciated what was happening, what was going on. So you got this porn culture and not realizing that, like, man, listen, most of these young people weren't getting married because he wanted to love his wife as Christ loved the church, and she wanted to, and they wanted to raise a family and procreate, and they were getting married because they wanted to have sex. And there were expectations. They were taking the world's description of sexual pleasure as the highest form. They were getting married and thinking like, man, this is actually way harder than we thought. I mean, as a pastor, I've met with people who have been married who are not able to bring, he's not able to bring his wife to a climax. He's not even, it's almost years after and having to work through that stuff. So it's not like you just get married and bam, it's like the Lord's going to bless it and it's going to be, and it's like, nah, family doesn't work like that.
You figure one of the things too that's an issue is, you're practicing marriage before you're actually married.
100%.
So when you have a church culture too that just, doesn't really deal with what it's like to be in a relationship, to court someone, to date someone, or to just get to know a young lady or a young man before marriage, a lot is left up in the air. You know what I'm saying? So you're dating and you're acting like you're married, and everything you do when you're married is pretty much allowed except having sex. So that's the one thing that's the constant challenge in those relationships. You're always fighting this denial, this self-denial, fighting this desire. So you're like, you know what? What's the one way to settle this? Because we're doing everything else, just like being married. Well, let's hurry up and get married so that we can handle this one, which keeps bringing us back down. The dirty little sex monster.
Right, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But in reality, because we're not telling people, yo, this stuff is pleasurable outside in the world too. I mean, 100%. Sex is not only pleasurable in the marriage bed. It's pleasurable out there too. It just comes with consequences that the marriage bed don't come with.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the marriage bed is glorifying to the Lord. Out there, it's not. You know what I'm saying? So there's a difference, but it doesn't mean it's not pleasurable. It doesn't mean that, we lie and act as if though there's no good feeling that comes out of this stuff.
100%, bro. And I think that's what people got disillusioned by. It's funny when you hear the people who've walked away from Christianity because of purity culture, they usually they're saying the very things you're saying. And because of that, they've redefined sort of the standards.
They view it as freedom.
Yeah.
They view it as freedom. They view giving into their lustful desires because they're pleasurable. They view it as freedom. You've denied me this my whole time. Like,
right.
That's how it's viewed.
Well said.
And when you hear those testimonies, that's all it is. They're testifying of their exit from any chance of holiness. 100%. They're testifying of their exit from God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're testifying. It's really hurtful to even listen to at times.
It is. It's kind of sad. And you feel like, man, it didn't have to be this way. And again, I said people were well-intentioned. I know that they were, but it turned into a movement and really a way to make money and a way to impose a level of control and shame and isolate people and make sex like this taboo thing to the point where even couples find it hard to talk about sex after they're married. Almost like, it's like, what? God made this. Now I'm bringing it. Remember where we're headed. We're about to now transition to the point that we're making in this show, that evangelical purity culture paved the way for the acceptance of gay marriage in the church. So among believers, and now we're gonna make our way there and explain what we mean by that. And so one of the primary ways this happened is a bad theology on the gift of singleness. All right. Let me take you back to 2003. This was somewhat on the fringes, of the purity culture movement. I was at a conference called New Attitude. This was December 2003. I was dating then who my wife is now. We were dating. And I was at this conference of singles. It was probably about 3,500 singles there. And Al Mohler gave a sermon on marriage. And basically, I mean, I remembered, I went back and looked online to find it and read the transcript. But there were points where he basically said, look, if you're single and she's single and you're both Christians, then get married. What are you doing, right? It was just idea. And he was saying like, it was interesting because all the girls were cheering. They wanted to get married, right? It's usually the guys that take a lot longer than the girls. Girls have their wedding dresses picked out when they're 6. Guys be 26 and be trying to figure out if they're going to buy the PS5 or something, right? So there's this sense where, so Al Mohler teaches this message on like telling guys to get married. And then, but prior to that, what I learned, because I wasn't a Christian during this time, was this: there was a teaching. Al Mohler brought this up there as well. I think someone asked a question, and he brought this up, and I was told about prior teaching, and then I researched and found out this is true. There was this understanding of they called it the gift of celibacy, if you wanted to kind of be funny, or the gift of singleness. And what people taught, what they were teaching in the purity culture was this: that if you have the gift of celibacy or the gift of singleness, then you're not going to want to get married. Like they would take, when Jesus said in Matthew 19 about being a eunuch, this is hard to hear, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. And then they heard Paul talking about it is a gift in 1 Corinthians 7 and so forth. But I don't think Paul was talking about it's a gift like a spiritual gift from Romans 12 or 1 Corinthians 12. I think Paul just meant if someone isn't burdened by the desire for marriage, that's a gift. But the way that the gift of singleness or the gift of celibacy was taught in the purity culture, and even up through the family of churches I was a part of, was that if you have the gift of singleness, then you have no desire to get married. So if you have a desire to get married, then you don't have the gift of singleness and are going to be married. Okay?
I remember telling people that.
Yeah. Let me tell you, this was the beginning of why I'm going to walk you through this. Why this was the beginning of how the evangelical purity culture paved the way for gay marriage to be accepted by Christians in the church. So you take it, you pivot off of everything that we're saying. You got the lack of understanding. You got the idolization of marriage. You got promises of sexual blessing. All these things, right? Then you teach people that you're going to get married unless you have no desire to, and that's the gift of singleness. The problem is that's not what the Bible teaches. That's not what the Bible teaches. Yes, if you don't desire to get married, it is a gift, but the Bible never said the only people that will not get married are the people that have the gift of singleness that have no desire to. So you created in all these people, true love waits, and if they have a desire to be married, then they're going to get married. They don't have the gift of singleness. They don't have the gift. This is going to make a lot of sense, and you're going to see what I'm saying in just a moment about how it relates to gay marriage. But so you're teaching all these people, you're making assumptions that all these thousands of kids who are at these conferences all are heterosexual and they're all going to get married one day. And that's sort of your motivation for manipulating them to wait to all these things, right? Is that there's going to be a time when you're able to fulfill these desires in marriage. Just wait. That's the promise. But it's not a promise that the Bible makes. It's not a promise. Now, Strack alluded to this earlier, but here's the problem with that promise. In the presentation of the gospel in Mark 8, Jesus says, look, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me, right? So the idea of denial of self is not just until you get it's a functional part of what it means to be a Christian. You're going to deny yourself certain things. Now, you don't always know what those things are, but what Jesus wasn't just saying you're going to deny yourself giving in the sexual sin. You're denying yourself the irrational but functional control of your life because you're submitting to Jesus. When Paul listed out all the ways in 2 Corinthians 11 that he proves he's an apostle because he was beaten, whipped 3 times with 39 lashes, stoned, left for dead, shipwrecked, hungry with much, floating in the water for days. Like he named bitten by a snake. He named all this suffering. Paul didn't choose to suffer. He chose to follow Jesus.
Right.
He chose to deny himself, and whatever that came with is what he signed up for.
That's why he said in all things.
In all things, right? Mm-hmm. That I can find contentment, right?
Right?
So when you teach all these people that you're going to be married if you have the desire to be married, you didn't teach people to deny themselves, to take up their crosses and follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. You taught people, as it pertains to sexuality, deny yourself until you get married. You didn't say deny yourself because you want to follow Jesus.
Right.
This is a functional component of the gospel. You deny yourself. That, right? So you got people coming up and who are hearing this. They're in this culture of evangelicalism and they're hearing these messages. The problem is they have desires for the same sex. Now, they've been taught that the Bible is that homosexuality is sin or whatever. But they have these desires. They have desires, and they were not told to deny yourself these desires. They were told deny yourself. If you have the desire to be married, then that means you don't have the gift of singleness. You're going to be married, right? But you have a bunch of people growing up in this community hearing these messages. They can't pray the gay away in terms of their desires. They still have them. They want to be in intimate, in their minds, monogamous, God-honoring relationships, and they haven't been told to deny themselves. They've only been told to go to remember Exodus, like conversion therapy, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the alternative: either become heterosexual or go to hell, almost, right? That was almost what it felt like. But there wasn't this place for, hey, listen, you could be a eunuch, because a eunuch literally was someone who didn't have a sexual organ. But that's not what Jesus meant in Matthew 19. Jesus was speaking that people make themselves eunuchs on their own, figuratively, right? So I'm choosing not to use the sexual organ. And I think many people who struggle with same-sex attraction, that's the cross that they carry. When they choose to follow Christ and follow what the Bible actually says, they're choosing to be eunuchs and not use that sexual organ in the metaphorical sense. But because so many people were guaranteed marriage based on a desire to be married, you have all these people growing up in this culture and they have desires to be married. They want to honor the Lord. They just happen to be attracted to the same sex. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, instead of, you know what, this might mean I'm supposed to deny myself and follow Jesus, it's, well, I want to get married, and so maybe the problem is not me because God gave me these desires. I prayed, take the gay away. I was born this way. Maybe the problem is that marriage needs to be more expansive. Now, if you think I'm just jumping the gun, if you go read Matthew Vines' book, God and the Gay Christian, I meant to have it here so I could read the excerpt of A Crazy Day. One of his chief arguments for gay marriage is what I'm saying right now. That they don't have the gift of singleness. That singleness is a gift. And that if you do not have the desire to not be married, then you're supposed to be married from God. That's one of he has a chapter. And that was the most popular book on the topic 6-7 years ago. He's teaching people, and people are saying, I agree with it, because they were taught the gift of singleness is something that you have. So if you don't have it, then God wants you to be married. And if you have desires for same sex, then the problem is not your desires. It's that marriage needs to be expanded to include those desires because you don't have the gift of celibacy. They didn't mean to do this, but this paved the way for gay marriage in the church. This is one of the main arguments that they're making. One of their main arguments, that I don't have the gift of singleness. But the Bible, and so here, let me just say this right now, because this argument has come up a lot. I don't know how much people take it seriously now. Lady Gaga made the Born This Way thing, and there's this idea, listen, God made me this way, I was born this way. God, in his wisdom, here's what I love about the Lord. One of the reasons I love the Lord. In his wisdom, he addresses all that stuff, right? So even if you were born this way, if you feel like God made you this way, you were born that way. The whole idea in the Gospels is to be born again, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter how you were born, because the call from John 3, Jesus talking to Nicodemus, and he's like, look, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus was like, what, are you supposed to go in your mother's womb again? He was like, man, you the teacher of Israel? And you don't know what I'm talking about? This idea of being born again, because God, it doesn't matter how you were born. It matters if you're born again. So even if you were born this way, that's not the point. Everyone's born with certain proclivities, right? Certain sinful dispositions. So we have to be born again. Right. So if you're in the alphabet community and you have these desires and you genuinely believe that you're a Christian and you genuinely want to honor the Lord and you believe that the gift of singleness is not yours, and this is what you've been taught all this time throughout purity culture, then guess what the problem is? The problem is not, I need to deny self. The problem is the way we're understanding marriage is too limited. And so now you create a theological corpus that changes what the original authors meant or what they knew or what they understand. You start questioning marriage because you were taught that if you have these desires, you're going to be married.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back, one of the main arguments was we're not talking about like being sensual with other people. We're talking about monogamous relationships. That's what they were talking about, like people getting married and being with one other individual. That was the big deal. It's like, oh, we're not talking about just being promiscuous and being out there. We're talking about actually loving and being in a loving, committed relationship. That's what was one of the things that was being pushed, because it's seen by society still, marriage, as something that should be strived for, something that should be longed for, something that should be sought after and even upheld, because it's natural and it helps grow society. We know what it means for the infrastructure of society to have marriages. So it's looked at as a good thing, and that's the way they argued. One of the ways that they argued in the beginning.
Yeah, and so we're saying this to say that purity culture was well-intentioned, but it became an authority ideology that really shamed people, confused Christians, and didn't really deal with this, because what you thought was, when you get married, all your sexual struggles will go away. And that's just not true. That's just not true. I'm a pastor. I meet with people who have been married and have sexual struggles. It's just not true. And so I don't know what the marriages were of the people that were teaching this stuff. Hats off to them if that was their experience, but that's just not the way it works. And so you create a culture of expectation by teaching a culture of limitation, and then you have all these people come up in it, and they have varying degrees of experiences. So people get married, they get hurt, they get divorced. You have people who have same-sex attraction who have not been sufficiently told that, look, you when Paul said, I wish all of you were single as I am, he made a case that because when you're married, you're distracted of the things of the world.
Right.
And there wasn't a good, I'm not saying no one ever did this, but there was not really good enough, robust teaching. And I'll just be honest, even apart from like purity culture, I think in the evangelical church, because there's been an idolization of marriage. I mean, let me just be clear. It's only really the Song of Solomon and a few Proverbs, right? The Bible is pro-marriage, but it's not pro-everybody get married, right? So there's this you create.
I mean, it's definitely not a command.
It's not a command, exactly, right? And it's not a promise.
No, it's not. It's not a promise. It's not a command. I mean, and you know, people like procreation. I mean, the procreation isn't a command. I mean, it was to Adam and Eve, but was it to all of humanity? I don't know. I mean, if it is, then you would have to say marriage is a command because procreation only comes forth through marriage according to God's law.
Yeah, well said.
So,
but to your now you're saying something because there are people who treat that as a command.
That's how it was primarily treated in my lifetime. That's why I'm saying it that way.
Yeah, wow. And that's just and so my point is, it's the command is to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus.
Facts.
And you do it, and this is what the thing is, you do it because you're motivated to honor the Lord. You have a conviction to honor the Lord. That's what it means.
To be with him. I mean, you want to be with him. I want to be with him.
Right.
I don't want nothing else. There's nothing else iller in creation or in existence than God.
So I just think, because I would say this, even in my tenure as a pastor, there were times I've had to tell people, singles, hey, you have value in the church.
Right.
Like, you have value because all you hear about is marriage and the marriage this and marriage that. And you know, that's the world. Like, in the world, the highest form of romance, love is romance. It goes romance. This is how love works in the world. It's romance, sex, then it's parental, right? Mm-hmm. Then it's, I would say, whatever you call your pet, like having a pet, and then occupational, I love my job, and so forth. You know, well, let me say, romance, parental, familial, like siblings, all that stuff. Then pets, then your job. But in the Bible, the highest form of love is sacrifice.
Right.
It's service. Jesus said, no greater love can a man do but to lay down his life for his friends. Right? So in the Bible, love isn't an emotion, it's an action, it's a verb, right? It's patient, it's kind. It does not insist on its own way. It doesn't envy. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. It always believes, always bears all things, believes all things, hopes all. You know, it's these actions, right? And so we allowed the world to teach us that love was an emotion, even for Christians. And so now we have this fusion of the emotion and the action of love, which has now led to this weird dynamic of, if you're a Christian, the most loving thing you can do is approve of whatever emotion people have for each other. And so now we find ourselves at a place where we're being questioned on if we're loving because we may disagree with some people's conviction that God honors the kind of marriage that they have, despite clear teaching from the Bible. So people will go to places like this. You probably have heard this argument. So the biblical authors they were written in a historical culture, and they were writing about the sexuality that they were aware of, which was largely heterosexual. They didn't understand sexual orientation. So they were writing to their day, but if they were, they didn't understand that there were people who were born, who had exclusive desires for sexual intimacy with the same sex. So in other words, what they're saying is, because the Bible was written a long time ago by people in a different historical cultural setting as it pertains to sexuality, then those things don't necessarily speak to today because they didn't know about the kind of sexuality that we have today.
What's funny about that is when you watch movies that go back to biblical times, they ain't got no problem showing homosexuality all over them joints.
None, none, bro, none. But what people are saying is, it wasn't that it didn't exist, but people didn't exclusively desire that, which is just not true. That's not a 20th century phenomenon.
No,
but here,
not at all.
But let me just point. I've said this in a previous video, but let me just say this real quick to wrap this part up. Even if you thought that was true, if you thought that the biblical authors did not understand sexual orientation as we see it today, so we should be able to include any sexuality because the Bible wasn't addressing that. Here's the problem with that argument. The whole Bible is a historical, cultural document.
That's right.
So if you say that the biblical authors didn't know about sexual orientation back, that was a historical document, so it doesn't have future implications. If that's true, then you have to also say the same thing about salvation.
Right.
Salvation was written in the same historical document. Forgiveness is written in the same historical document. So you can't say, well, when it comes to sexuality, this doesn't have future implications, but salvation does? How can you? How do you determine that? How do you determine any sin issue in the Bible when they were all written in a historical, cultural context?
Right.
Why do we extrapolate just sexuality and leave other? You can't do that. But again, this is the kind of logic that you get to when you've just not been told that it may be your cross to bear, that you have to deny yourself. You deny your sexual desires and giving in to them to take up your cross and follow Jesus. And Strack alluded to this, and I'm going to say this, and then I'm done with this point. Strack alluded to this, but I want to reiterate. Every person has to deny themselves for the purpose of sexual holiness. Most people do not want to have sex with one person for the rest of their lives. Most people, you see someone, you're attracted. If you were allowed to do it, you'd probably do it. Monogamy is not a man-made reality. It's God's. Mm-hmm. Because most people are not only desirous to have sex with one person. You want to have multiple partners, right? So when you're married, just because you're able to express your sexuality, you still have to you have to deny yourself.
Yeah.
You have to deny yourself having sex with more than what you're allowed. So everyone has to do it. Some people do get to express their sexuality in a way that God designed, and that's the rub. But the reality is like all of us have to deny ourselves, take up our cross. But because purity culture said deny yourself until you get married, and if you have the gift of singleness, you're never going to want to get married. So if you want to get married, you don't have the gift of singleness. You got people who are growing up saying, hey, I don't have the gift of singleness. I want to get married. I just happen to want to get married to someone of the same gender. Mm-hmm. And there you have it. So here, purity culture paves the way. And Christians, and here's the last part. Because Christians are pointing out how loveless a lot of that theology in the way that it harmed people was, now they want to be loving. Yep. And so to be loving, you're going to do the opposite of what that was, whatever that was, because that wasn't loving. So if that was restrain yourself, wait till and do this, then the opposite, which is loving, is to not restrain yourself, is to let people marry who they want to marry, all these different perspectives. And so
it's just it really comes down to sloppy overseeing, sloppy parenting. It's just, you teach your kids to self-deny for reasons, the main reason, Christ alone. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like this stuff is just, it throws us into all kinds of nonsense, man. All kinds of nonsense when you elevate marriage, when you elevate anything to the level of idolatry, to the level of the epitome of achievement. It's always going to throw things through a loop, when it comes to Christ. especially when you backtrack and you try to make things right over all of the flaws throughout history of what
100%.
the church has done and how we've handled a particular type of person, turning around then to try to make things right, and you just, marriage is what we have to offer. Let's offer them marriage.
Right.
Which just flies right in the face of God. So
100%. And I think, too, the idolization of marriage, lastly, it didn't let people think, hey, singleness is probably an option.
right.
Like the Lord said, hey, through Paul, I would prefer that all of you were single as I am, because you're distracted. There are some people who felt like the gift of single, like not getting married was weird. Like I had somebody tell me recently, they don't have a desire to get married and wanted me. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, bro. That's fine. Like you might have to get the singleness. You might, in this season, you just want to serve and honor the Lord.
And stop harassing the single people in the church about marriage, man.
I know. Thank you, bro. Thank you for saying that.
Stop trying to hook them up with everybody you see come through. You know, allow the Lord to be sovereign in that area also.
100%.
You know what I mean?
But again, that gets back to the inevitability of marriage. It's not inevitable.
Yeah.
Like God may give someone the desire to be married, and that's not going to be what happens for them. And it's not because God is cruel. It's that for whatever reason, he is determined that this is the path, this is the way, this is the cross you got to carry to glorify me.
I mean, he still works in the good of, for the good of those who love him in all things.
And you know what I think too, man? You know what I think God allows that? This is a broader point about just suffering in general. When Paul says in Romans 8:18, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth being compared to the glory that will soon be revealed in us. I think he meant that. So
I think so too.
I think he meant, like, listen, heaven, which is a whole different conversation, a different show that we're going to talk about, but heaven, not something we think about often. That place is infinitely so much better than what you're going through now. That God will allow you to go through these things now, because he knows when you get to heaven, you're going to be like, yo!
You just summed up the whole episode, basically, because we turned marriage into heaven. You know what I'm saying? Like, long for the marriage once you get there. But really, we should be talking about heaven that way.
100%.
Long for heaven, long 100%. For the Lord, because when you get there, it's going to be amazing. And there won't be a letdown, because there's not the same, like, with sex, we had expectations. With sex, we had things we saw that we could compare. There is nothing in existence that could compare to being in the presence of holy God for eternity.
Nothing.
That is what heaven is. If Christ is not there, it's not heaven. To be in his presence for eternity is, there's nothing in comparison.
Nothing.
So there's not going to be a letdown. You know what I'm saying?
But yeah, right. And that's where I think, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is not convincing the world that he didn't exist. I think it's convincing the world that the next world is not going to be better than this one.
Right.
And so
you got to live your best life now.
Live your best life now. So I know Christians who are afraid to die. Now, don't get me wrong. I got 3 boys, 15, 13, and 11. I want to see them boys grow up. I would love to live until my oldest is 40, where I get to see him. He's Lord willing, a father. I'm trusting that my boys will, go that path. That's the Lord's will for them. I would love to see them as dads with their own families, and I have grandchildren, each of them doing their thing, and teaching their children the ways of the Lord, just loving their children. I would love that, right? I would love it. But I'm not afraid that I'm trying to be with the Lord too, though, fam. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like I don't got a death wish. Like, but it's like I know Christians who are terrified of dying, and it's like, do you realize that when Paul said to live is Christ, to die is gain, that he meant, hey, it's infinitely better to be with the Lord. Amen. Paul only chose to stay with the Philippians because he wanted to bless the church.
Right.
But we treat this is where you see all this taking back the country and fighting. No, we just forgetting it, like, man, why does God want you to take back this country when he plans on redeeming the planet?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? He's going to redeem the planet, fam.
Right.
Revelation 20:21 and 22, it said, man, the city is going to come out of God himself.
New heavens and
new heaven and new earth. Like, what does God want you to take back? When he said in Isaiah 66, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool.
Right.
What will man build for me? You think taking back the country for God is like God couldn't sovereignly? Yeah. Did you ever see Eternals? You ever see that movie Eternals?
Yeah, I saw that. John.
That joint was kind of whack, right? But
it was super.
That joint was whack, right? But I'm gonna make a point that makes the movie decent. Remember, one of the Eternals, his eyes would light up, and he had the ability to control people.
Yeah.
Remember that dude? Mm-hmm. He could just control you, and like you would just stop and just do whatever he wanted you to do, right? That was a crazy joint. He just like boom. They would be ready to fight each other. Then they'd all just drop and do what he did, right? God could easily do that if he wanted that.
He could.
He could easily be like, all right, everybody's just going. Nah, that's not what he's doing. It's like in this life we struggle, we suffer, we fight, we get disappointed. Hebrews 11, it said they did not receive what was promised. So these people were actually promised something, and they believed the promiser, and they kept, when it said they were in sackcloth and ashes, they were sawn in two. It said the world was not worthy of them, but God was not afraid to be called their God. These were people that they did not receive what was actually promised. And today we treat every desire that we have as a promise from God.
Right.
And so we find ourselves in this weird dichotomy where we don't even look forward to heaven, and we're hoping that things get better here. It's like, listen, fam, if you're a genuine believer, then there is a better place for you. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be with the Lord in eternity by his grace, worshiping him, and all that we experience here, the suffering, when Revelation 21:7 says, I will wipe every tear from their eye. Revelation 22 says that the tree of life will have fruit that will be for the healing of the nations. Like, we got to think about up top. And that's what purity culture didn't. It was so horizontal that it forgot to tell people to look up. So you got all these people that come up and think, well, I got desires. I want to get married. I want to do this and I want to do that. And so now we have this huge fracture within the church where over the idea of sexuality in a relational context, where many of us think, okay, we're traditional, we think the Bible doesn't agree with it, and progressive is to think that the Bible does. And a lot of these people, if we're right, which I believe that I'm on the side of truth, if I'm right, then a lot of people are going to spend eternity in hell because in many ways, they were instructed with horrible theology.
That's a fact. And I mean, just, to end on a more positive note, if you are convicted by, let's say, your lack of purity, your inability to, remain a virgin, you know what I'm saying? And this episode has brought conviction, sit in that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're struggling in your marriage, sit in that conviction, but remember that God is kind. Remember that God is loving. Remember that God is quick to forgive those who come to him. You know what I'm saying? So go to the cross. I was reading the other day in Jeremiah 12 where the Lord was declaring that he would be merciful to those that taught Israel to call out on the name of Baal. He said he would be merciful to those who taught his people how to call upon Baal. He would be merciful to them if all they did was come in and learn his ways and be amongst his people. So if he would be merciful to those who taught his people to blaspheme and to chase other gods, he'll be merciful to you if you call upon his name. He's a good God.
Man, you can't end on a better note.
Amen.
Man. Appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you for the chat. Sometimes it's hard for us to. I try to peek in, put a comment up, but we got to stay focused because we.
Right.
I start reading and stuff. I get caught.
I saw that comment by Langston though, where his homie went to the Catholic Church because of the
you saw that
theology on singleness. That's a dope. That's a dope comment. That could have opened up a can of worms there.
It could have. if we was in that mood, we would have pulled the worms out.
Yeah.
But now we appreciate y'all, man. It's good to be back and to see you on the chat room. We're here. We're glad to be here. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I know we got some good shows coming up, man. Some good topics we're gonna be talking about. So I'm excited for that. We're excited to get back to some measure of normalcy. It's been pretty crazy for both of us for different reasons. So we haven't been able to do a weekly show, but we're trying to get back to that point. We're trying to finish strong between now and August, trying to get back to where we're doing a show weekly as much as possible. And obviously, I'll be dropping some Kennedy's Corner videos. Got one tomorrow on part 2 of The Color of Satan. Right, so we'll be doing that tomorrow. But
Deuce.
Yeah, right. We appreciate y'all, man. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the like button. If you're listening to this on podcast or app, whatever, thank you. Please go to Kirk Kennedy's Corner on YouTube, like and subscribe, and say some very nice things about us for the algorithm. And if you don't, then it just means you can't handle the tooth. That's how we do it. We appreciate y'all. I'm Kirk Kennedy. He's Strack the Wolverine.
Come on already.
And we are out of here, y'all. Grace and peace.
Peace.
Thank y'all. Go leave a comment on the actual video.
Word up.
So we can get some love from the algorithm.
Go Birds.